Well, New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian has had a harrowing day. Few politicians relish appearing before parliamentary committees. On this occasion, it was budget estimates, but unfortunately, more odious questions about her private life. As you might remember, I made the point last night to the Mail panel, wondering why we have parallel systems of justice in this state. In a police investigation, the person being investigated is not named. The police seek to gather evidence. If they believe the evidence can sustain a charge, then the person is named and the charge is laid. Why is ICAC different? As I said, it leaks like a sieve. These matters should be heard in camera. And if the evidence justifies it, name the person and ventilate the charges. We're talking today about the abuse of justice. I don't think anything is a greater metaphor of the abuse of justice than the New South Wales ICAC. But that's not why I want to talk to the Premier tonight, about a different matter entirely. To her great credit, she has said there needs to be a radical shake-up in how the coronavirus pandemic is managed. And, of course, she's been attacked by people like McGowan in WA and others. As you know, I've expressed grave reservations about the way this coronavirus issue has been handled. We knew from day one that its victims would be the old, the infirm and the morbidly obese, people living with multiple deleterious conditions. In fact, the average age at death is 83, which is a couple of years above average life expectancy. And with 99% of cases from the outset mild, this so-called pandemic was nowhere near as lethal as some people wanted us to believe. Indeed, the most recent data from the Bureau of Statistics, January 1 to November 24, 2020, showed fewer deaths, 126,974, than was the average of the previous 5 years, 128,000. Yet borders have been closed. We've endured the brutal self-destructive madness of lockdowns, following the example of communist China, one of the last truly totalitarian states. Well, Gladys Berejiklian, the New South Wales Premier, is saying there needs to be a radical shake-up in how the pandemic is managed and that we, quote, need to think very differently moving forward about how we measure our success in dealing with the virus. Well, I'm glad to say she's weathered the budget estimates. It wasn't ICAC she was being for. I was just making that point to you. But it was budget estimates today, but they're on the same rubbish again. Premier, thank you for your time.
Pleasure, Alan.
Just one question. Since you've been Premier, as you know, I've driven you nuts, I'm sure. I only ask you one question, and we'll get onto the other business about coronavirus, about the need for ICAC reform. I don't want you to comment too much, but I'm just saying again, the parading of your private life in public was disgraceful. And I just asked one question. Shouldn't these matters be heard in camera, evidence adduced, and then if need be, charges laid?
Look, Alan, there's a process. I respect the process. I respect the body, and they need to do their important work, and that's all I'll say on that.
Okay. Right, back to coronavirus. You've read the public mood. We do need to think very differently. What do you mean, though, when you say we need to think very differently?
Well, Alan, what we have to deal with is we've now started the vaccine rollout, and we know that when the vast majority of our population are vaccinated, that it greatly reduces the chance of anyone getting the virus, and it greatly reduces the chance of people passing the virus on. And if that's the case, we need to change the way we think about what we measure success by. There is no point for us to have indefinite borders closed to the rest of the world. That's not a sustainable position. So now that the vaccine rollout has started, and now that the federal government is advising us, and we're very optimistic that we'll meet the timeframe of having most of the nation offered the vaccine by the end of October, that then begs the question, we need to measure success differently. We can't just rely on reporting 0 cases or the number of cases every day, because that means we confine ourselves to a life of restrictions, to a life where we can't travel internationally, where we can't be part of the global community, and that's not a sustainable position. Look, don't get me wrong, we've done incredibly well to date, but we need to change our thinking. We need to change the way we measure how the virus is treated in society. And, for example, if the vaccine, as it does, is reducing the likelihood of people getting the illness seriously, being admitted to hospital, and it's reducing the chance of people spreading the virus to others, then what we should do is really measure how many people are hospitalised as opposed to the number of cases. If getting the virus when you've been vaccinated means a few days at home and then you return to your normal activity, well, then we need to think about how we're dealing with the pandemic very differently, because we're going to live with this virus. It's not going to go away. It won't go away for a number of years. And the question for us is, how do we as a nation come to terms with living with the virus, coexisting with it, in the full knowledge that the vaccine will reduce people being admitted to hospital if they have it and reduce the likelihood of people passing it on in the rate that they do now?
Look, I agree with you. I agree with you entirely. I mean, I just think this has been madness. Just one thing there when you're saying, and I noticed your choice of words when you said offered the vaccine, which you're the first leader to say that, offered the vaccine. You are aware people have concerns about the vaccine because it's a brand new vaccine, the first of its type. And I show to our viewers, traditional vaccines are made up of small doses of the disease-causing organism which is introduced into the body. That provides the immune system the ability to mount a response. But this is an mRNA vaccine, and it tricks the body into producing some of the viral proteins itself. So people are a bit concerned about that. If the vaccine has never been used before, do you understand there's a bit of a vaccine hesitancy out there? How do you address that?
Well, Alan, I think the way we address it is, firstly, the vaccine's been rolled out for some time in places like the UK, Europe and North America. And it's been supported by leaders in those countries. Plus, we also have to accept that the standards we have at a federal level, the regulators, when they're approving the vaccines, are very strict. And they've been through, the vaccine's not made available to the Australian community unless it's been through those regulatory tests. So we don't take the word of overseas regulators may have done. So I would say that I intend to get the vaccine when it's available to me next week. I will be getting the AstraZeneca vaccine. That's the one that's offered to the vast majority of, or will be offered to the vast majority of our population.
Just
but
on
Alan,
that,
I
though,
also
sorry. Go on.
No, it's okay. I was just going to say, though, I did choose the word offer because I'm convinced most people will choose to take up the vaccine. We don't like to make things mandatory in New South Wales. We believe that people will exercise good judgment. They'll exercise and consider how long it will take before we can have those freedoms we've all been craving. I think there'll be a lot of pent-up demand for people to be able to go overseas, for people to be able to enjoy life as close to normal as possible whilst we're living with the virus. And that certainly is an incentive for many, including myself, to get vaccinated. And that's why I did choose that word, because we don't like to make things mandatory.
Well, just one thing, could I ask you, many countries have indemnified the big pharmaceutical companies against lawsuits for adverse reactions. So I understand the Australian government has granted pharmaceutical companies an indemnity should their COVID-19 vaccine cause illness or death. Can you understand? I'm just saying that people are writing to me about this stuff, that if the pharmaceutical companies are asking for such an indemnity, many would say it demonstrates a lack of confidence in their product. Should there be government support for those who might have issues down the track from the vaccine?
Well, I think the important thing is, Alan, it's a choice that we all make. I hope it's a choice people will take up. And if it wasn't safe, it wouldn't be offered to the community in New South Wales. In New South Wales, our health system is actually following up people who've had the vaccine, following up people who may have had pain, additional pain or anything else. And from early reports, after a week or more of people receiving the vaccine, the vast majority of people have reported a positive experience, and that follows the experience in other parts of the world. Our health people are following up. And certainly I'll be encouraging everybody in and around me. I mean, I don't worry so much about getting the virus, but I do worry about passing it on to others. The reason I want to get the vaccine is to make sure I don't pass it on to my parents or people in and around me whom I care about. I wouldn't be able to live with the guilt. And also, whilst it does mainly affect those who are older and vulnerable and have an immune issue, it can impact younger people at random. And so we can't assume that everybody is completely immune from being taken to hospital in intensive care, irrespective of their age. But obviously, the vaccine vastly reduces that.
Yeah. Well, I just should say, Gladys, before you go, I should say there's only about 10 or 12 people in hospital today. One of the things that I am concerned about, and you're right to say we've got to manage this differently, I just wish we'd give people more information. How many are mild cases? How many are serious cases? How old are they? Do they have comorbidities? Shouldn't we dismantle this alarmism because people are still afraid? That's the difficulty.
Well, Alan, that's why I made the comments I did today. There's no point standing up to the community when the vast majority of the population have the vaccine to say we've got 0 cases today when the borders are shut and when the vaccine's been rolled out. That's not a good measure. I think we should be looking at measuring and telling the community these are the number of people in ICU, or these are the number of people who need intensive health attention. Because unless we take that approach moving forward, we're going to be stuck in the current way of thinking, which isn't appropriate given we're rolling out the vaccine. The whole point of rolling out the vaccine is to give our community the freedom we've been craving for a long time, is to allow us to consider how we can travel internationally and allow international visitors to come to Australia. These are the things we need to start thinking about now before we know it.
I agree with you.
Before we know it, October will be here before we know it. So we need to be prepared for that. We need to be prepared for that.
I agree with you. Thank you for sharing that with us tonight. I hope you can get some success at the National Cabinet about those views. I think we really have to be far more progressive than he's been. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for your contributions, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Alan. All the best.
There she is, the Premier of New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian.